All right. So the last question I saw. Sorry, I see you. I see you are here now. The last question I saw on the other stream, and that is on the slides now in the front page is: can we go over the differences between the high and low Middle Ages? Let me scroll down and see where everyone is, so that maybe if I see you, you guys can see that I have switched streams. This is the new stream tab. It's up here. I see somebody is on Inca. I see someone else is on the Conquistadors. Just so that you know, this is the new stream. Posted a new link. I'm sorry for the backlog before. I think that things are moving now. It seems like the computer is moving a little better. All right. So answering Supreet's question, or someone's question, I don't know whose question it was, the differences between the high Middle Ages and the low Middle Ages. So first things first, the Middle Ages are in Europe, European history, the time period between the end of the Roman Empire, the Western one, and the Renaissance, which is the rebirth of the Roman culture and Greek way of life. The Europeans have a pretty high opinion of themselves, especially when they view the achievements of the Romans and the Greeks. So that's the Middle Ages in general. We also know that for the most part, the rest of the world did pretty well during the Middle Ages. It's Europe that was not doing so well. So depending on where you lived in Europe during the early Middle Ages, in general, for the most part, things were pretty bad. There's a person I told you that does a podcast about the fall of the Roman Empire, and he, for example, called England a bloody, chaotic hellscape, something along those lines. Now, because it's also sometimes this early Middle Ages time period is known as a time period of transition. It's called the migratory period. This early Middle Ages time period, depending on where you lived, starts right around the end of the fall of the Roman Empire. Sometimes it's a little earlier than 476. Sometimes it's later than 476. It's in general, the 300s and the 400s is considered the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. And during that time, it's a period of transition. As the Roman Empire and the Roman government was no longer controlling territories and regions in Western Europe, they were replaced by Germanic tribes that were moving in from the east. They were pushed east by the Huns. And this is the system where this is the time when feudalism developed in Europe, because they couldn't control entire territories of land, and they set up the feudal system. Let's grab an image of the European feudal system. Lots of great images from this. On this, we have a bunch of different ones in our notes from earlier in the school year. This one has a cute picture. Let's totally go with this. And that's the early Middle Ages. The economic system was, this is not the stupid. There's very little trade, basically, because the territories throughout Western Europe there wasn't any unifying set of rules or laws, and moving throughout different lands and pieces of territory in Western Europe could sometimes mean that you were robbed. There was very little trade between territories, like mass production and industrialization. That was not industrialization with like machines, but mass production of goods in Britain, for example, totally stopped because they couldn't trade. The merchants and craftspeople in Britain couldn't trade it anywhere else outside of Britain, and therefore, as a result, they didn't need to have mass production or factories or anything else to produce the goods they were producing. So, in general, in terms of the economy, the economic system that replaced trade and commerce under the Roman Empire is called manorialism, where just basically serfs were confined to territories or pieces of land that were controlled by lords, vassals, or nobles, or knights. They worked on the land. Anything that they could ever possibly need for their entire lives was on that land or on that plot of land. Although for the most part, people just were farmers or serfs. And that's the early Middle Ages. Sometimes this time period is called the Dark Ages because there's a couple reasons it's called the Dark Ages. Number one, there's very little writing during this time period. Most people were not very well educated. Like peasants and serfs didn't keep diaries of their lives because they weren't educated. They didn't know enough to read or write and to produce diaries. But also because a lot of their life was a lot of working on manors or farms or doing some sort of agricultural work. So it's a dark period because in general, we don't know a lot about it from different perspectives and people's points of views. And because from what we can tell, life wasn't all that amazing or great, aside from a short golden age where Charlemagne was in control. Now, from about the 300s and the 400s up until about 1096, that's the early Middle Ages. Then, after the Crusades happen and start, and you've got this massive migration of Western European crusaders into the Middle East and then back into Europe, we get that reinvigoration of trade and interest in the Middle East from and by Europeans. And the result is, in the late Middle Ages, things changed, although it took a long time. So these are the major changes and differences between the early Middle Ages and the late Middle Ages, is that as a result of trade and commerce restarting in Europe as a result of the Crusades, the social and political structure that was feudalism began to decline, because in early Middle Ages, land was the most important thing that you could have that made you a very powerful individual or person, how much land or territory you were able to control. In the late and high Middle Ages, it was how much money you could control. It led to kings and queens kind of also centralizing power. Instead of collecting taxes from lords and nobles, they began to directly collect taxes for themselves. So they become bigger and stronger, or more wealthy and more powerful. Also, again, it was the serfdom declined because instead of peasants or serfs paying to live on a piece of land with their labor, lords and nobles wanted actual physical items or products that could be bought or sold so that they could buy or sold luxury items. And serfdom began to decline. We also see the beginning of centralized governments and states in Europe. So those are the big differences between the high and low Middle Ages. The thing that stayed the same for the most part was that above all, the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution. The Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in Europe, and it was politically powerful and spiritually powerful. Like regular, everyday people would have done whatever Catholic churches or Catholic Church clergymen would have asked for a number of reasons. You know, Catholic clergy performed religious sacraments and spiritual rites for people, made them spiritual leaders. They provided whatever education was offered in localities and regions, and then also because higher ranking members of the church were able to use their status as spiritual leaders in Europe to gain control and favor with political leaders, king, queens, dukes, princes, throughout Western Europe as well. More questions. Is there anything about India on the test we should know? Yes. You need to know where India is. First of all, that would be really, really important to remember. So let's do this. Let's do a world map. This computer's starting to slow down too. I hope it's still better though. Where's a really good world map? This one looks pretty good. This is a Mercator map projection, it looks like, which can be sometimes misleading about the size of everything, but you know, we're going to do the best we can with it. Like, this is not the actual size of Greenland. It's much smaller. Interesting fact, no one's really sure what's underneath the ice in Greenland, apparently. Like, it could be just one giant country covered in ice, but it could also be like a small series of islands and archipelagos, like, you know, over here in Canada. But no one's really sure. The ice is so thick. I think. I read that. Anyway, so let's get a world map up here. So first things first, Julia, we need to know where this is. And we're talking about India. We are talking about here. That's the wrong way for the arrow. Right there, here. This is India. And India, when we're talking about India in terms of world history, like India in world history, the Indus River Valley, the Ganges River Valley, and the Bay of Bengal, with the northern barrier of the Himalayan mountains and the Hindu Kush mountains to the northwest. Historically speaking, when we think of India, we think of what is also today Pakistan and Bangladesh, which today India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are 3 different countries, but they were more or less kind of one region, general region. The Indian subcontinent is one general region here. So this is India. The first thing we should note is that one of the first, maybe the first civilization in human history developed here in the Indus River Valley. Let's do another line. Why wouldn't it let me make a line? Oh, there we go. Arrow. So the Indus River Valley is in this region of the world. You actually have a map, as always, of where the Indus River Valley was. The Indus River Valley produced probably the most calories per acre in the ancient world. The Indus River Valley civilization is again, probably one of the oldest, but also the least understood. The writing that was used in the Indus River Valley is indecipherable. We don't know what it means. It's pictographic. A lot of the symbols that show up primarily tend up being a man with like some sort of bull horns that can tame a tiger. The Indus River Valley had some sort of vibrant, specialized economic system. We know that because the Indus River Valley civilization did lots of trade with Mesopotamia, which was over here to the west. So that's the Indus River Valley. After the Indus River Valley declined, at about that same time, the Aryan people from Central Asia migrated over the Hindu Kush Mountains and mixed with the people of the Indus River Valley civilization, and that's where we start to see the development of the ancient India that we studied for the most part this year, where Hinduism became a primary belief system centered around the caste system, the ideas of acquiring good karma by performing the roles and duties prescribed by your caste, so that when you died and you were reincarnated, you could move up into different castes. Eventually, you would, after living in each caste, you would elevate yourself to become a Brahmin, which is of the highest caste. And if you had good karma as a Brahmin, you would be released from the cycle of reincarnation. And that's a really simplistic version of Hinduism, but that's generally how it works. Hinduism has been, in the Indian subcontinent in India, kind of the dominant religious belief system for millennia, thousands of years, actually. Only recently, in the last 75 years, have there been major government initiatives by the Indian government to end caste privileges and distinctions, especially in terms of access to education and different types of jobs and social mobility. Although the caste system does still have a lot of cultural roots and influences in India today. In terms of later on, post Indus River Valley, post development of Hinduism in India, the two major civilizations that in India you need to know are Asoka and his empire, controlled initially by Chandragupta and then Asoka. Asoka was someone who practiced Buddhism, converted to Buddhism, and then didn't convert to Buddhism. He was a Buddhist. His family was Buddhist, but rededicated himself to Buddhism as the ruler of India, and set up a series of. It created a unified empire, unified almost the entire Indian subcontinent, not all of it, but most of it, and was able to organize and rule the region by creating a series of pillars to send out royal decrees and announcements and policies, so that people throughout India knew what the deal was under Asoka. A lot of these decrees encouraged people to get along with each other, protect the environment, and to be aware of different Buddhist festivals that were coming around. This is an example of one of those pillars they were normally erected or built in major public parks or public regions or public locations where people would see them. The other major empire that we focused on this year and spent a great deal of time studying was the Gupta dynasty. I should probably not delete things. This pillar was so cool. The other time period and area you need to know is the Gupta Golden Age in India. The territory that the Guptas controlled was much smaller than Ashoka. India ends up being a really difficult region to conquer and control large portions of it because of the geographic diversity. India, there's like a major desert in here. This entire region is plateau. There's coastal plains, but really tall mountains also in the east and the west. The Himalayan mountains are here. So if you're able to control this region here, the fertile plain region of India, you control most of the population. So the Gupta dynasty controlled this region of India, and they experienced a golden age where there were a number of achievements in math and science. We talked about the Maya inventing or developing zero. The Gupta were, I think in terms of the timeline, the first civilization to develop and understand the concept of zero. They developed vaccines, plastic surgery, and also dentistry. Achievements that were far ahead of anybody else in the world at the time. These are the things that pop to my head or stick out to my mind at the moment. I think if you look in your notes, you would probably find a lot of information about the Guptas. You probably have a pretty serious, I'm not going to search for it for you. I'm not going to do that to you. But you probably have a lot of information in your notes on the Gupta Golden Ages and what made them a golden age. More questions. Rahit, you're so hungry, you should probably, eat something. Are you going to take your final? I'm not going to be able to get the Chromebooks. I wasn't able to set them up for Monday. I think that we're going to have to do something either on your phones or Scantrons. Very disheartening that I was unable to get anything. I'll try again tomorrow first thing, but I don't know that I'll be able to do that. Tang and Song dynasties in China. Saprit, let's do those. Where are you, Tang and Song dynasties? There we go. Line spacing, let's go single wire. Great, remove space after paragraph, that's what it is. So you got major technological achievements like the magnetic compass, gunpowder, and movable wooden type. There was also, right before the Tang Dynasty took power, there was the construction of a Grand Canal that united the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, or began to. And it was expanded under the Mongols later, but the initial work was done in the dynasty that preceded the Tang and the Song. What's also really interesting is the transformation in culture that occurred under the Tang and Song dynasty, specifically more the Song, I believe. Man, I cannot spell tonight. Transformation of Chinese culture. There was a major transformation and change in Chinese culture. Prior to the Tang and Song dynasties, I guess in a lot of ways, I wouldn't say it resembled European culture, but the food that was eaten and the food that was eaten was predominantly wheat, and there was a change and shift to rice and tea being major items that were consumed. There's a shift in consumption of tea, shift to consumption of tea and rice. Should be more of a not culture, but diet, which is what I think people traditionally think of, like Japanese or Chinese cuisine today. I think when people think of what is eaten, you think of tea and rice, and that wasn't true of China really until uh, the Middle Ages. So that's what you need to know for the Tang and Song dynasties. Trading kingdoms of West Africa. You need to know that in Africa, in general, across the continent, they developed advanced civilizations and cities that, depending on who you ask, some travelers said that they were more glorious and remarkable than those countries and cities in just about anywhere else in the world, especially Ghana. Like Ghana was known as the land of gold. They had gold clothing, gold instruments, just gold everywhere, and buildings ordained and decorated with gold all throughout. And as a result, people found the cities to be incredibly beautiful. They also flourished they flourished because of the trans-Saharan trade that developed in the began to kick up in the 700s as northern Africa camels were introduced, and camels were animals that could make the long, treacherous, arduous journey across the Sahara Desert to reach the trading kingdoms of West Africa. The primary commodities that were traded was gold, Islam became a major religion in West Africa as well. In fact, if you're looking at Muslim populations in the world, Muslim countries with Muslim majorities, there are a large number in West Africa as a result of the trans-Saharan trade between the Muslim world, Northern Africa, and the Arabian world, and going to the east, and then trans-Saharan trade across the Saharan Desert into West Africa. And one person that we looked at that's an example of that was Mansa Musa. He got crazy rich, probably the richest man sometime in, according to one blog post, the richest man in the history of the world, but also was a symbol of Islam becoming such a dominant or an important force, religious force in West Africa. All right, I'm going to go check one thing. I'll be right back so I can go over some more information because I don't see questions. I have some other stuff I can go over really quickly, and then we'll be done for the night. We've been doing this too long. All right, let me go to Do not want to stall an update now. Michael, for Islam, you should know the main beliefs of Islam, the 5 pillars, that it's it's a monotheistic religion. You should know each of the 5 pillars, proclamation of faith, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, giving alms, Ramadan, praying 5 times a day. Those are the five big things to know about Islam in terms of their primary beliefs. You should know that in Islam, and then the Islamic Golden Ages. Hold on, Julie, I'll get to the Roman Empire in a second. The Islamic Golden Ages of the Umayyad and the Abbasid took place under Muslim leadership, and then are examples of the Umayyad and the Abbasid using Muslim cultural and religious beliefs to encourage and foster economic growth and learning and education throughout their empires. And we looked at a variety of different examples of cities and locations flourishing, like Baghdad and Cordoba in Spain. Baghdad being present-day Iraq and Cordoba being in Spain. Anything about the Roman Empire? Definitely need to know that the Roman Empire is best known in terms of their achievements in the areas of law and government. The saying in Rome about the Romans was that people do not judge Romans' law. The laws judge Romans, or decide things about Romans. A lot of our ideas about law, innocent until proven guilty, trial by jury, or trial by your peers, those sorts of things, due process developed in Roman times. We use a form of government called a republic, an indirect democracy, which is basically almost exactly what the Romans did in some way, shape, or form. Were modeled in a lot of ways based on the republic. You should know the architectural styles of the arch and the dome, and then there are some Greek elements as well with columns. The fall of the Roman Empire caused great chaos throughout Europe, and that the Byzantine Empire tried to continue a lot of the Roman legacy, or continue being Rome in the East, centered around Constantinople. All right, let me see if I can find some other things to ask you guys about. What are some other things you need to know? You should know the locations of the first civilizations and what domestication of animals and plants meant and how that changed the life for people. You went from being nomadic hunter-gatherers to being permanent, settling in permanent civilizations and settlements, and then because farming produced more reliable, larger and more reliable quantities of food, you get job specialization and the growth of civilization. Should know that one of the major achievements of Mesopotamia in Babylon under Hammurabi was the construction of Hammurabi's Code, which is famous for its severe punishments, but historically significant and important because it was probably the first set of codified or written laws. It's between monotheism and polytheism, which religions are monotheistic and which ones are polytheistic. You should remember that, again, in both the High and the Low Middle Ages, how the importance of the Catholic Church and the difference between the manor economy in Europe, the rivers by Mesopotamia were the Tigris and Euphrates. Look at your map in your notes. The manor economy was different from the Roman economy, and then the one that developed as a result of the commercial revolution. Manors didn't rely on any intermanor trade. Manors were self-sufficient. You should remember that, again, the Crusades were considered a successful failure because they increased trade in Western Europe, not only within Western Europe, but with the Middle East as well. One of the prime examples of how important the Catholic Church was in Europe is the construction of great cathedrals throughout Europe are like some of the great architectural achievements in Western Europe, even during the early Middle Ages and then later in the late Middle Ages. They're all churches, and it's the same thing in Rome and in Greece and in the Middle Eastern world. Some of the greatest architectural achievements or buildings were dedicated or had dedicated to religion or gods or had some sort of religious purpose. You should remember that European feudalism in general was decentralized. You should be able to know the importance of the different religious belief systems on different groups of people. You should remember that Christianity developed under the Roman Empire, and over the course of history has seen several different splits within Christianity. The first split was the Great Schism that occurred right really during the Middle Ages and right before the Crusades started, when the Western Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire split into two different religious kind of communities. And then later, the Roman Catholic Church split into Protestants versus Roman Catholics. The thing that makes all those three religious groups similar is that they believe in the teachings of Jesus and are branches of Christianity. You need to know that the Mongols conquered all of Asia and then encouraged trade and cultural diffusion between Asia and Europe. You should remember that things began to change in Europe during the Renaissance and the Reformation as people questioned old ideas and developed new ways of doing things. Some of those new ways of doing things focused primarily in questioning old beliefs, looking to science, or emphasizing human and individual developments to improve people's lives or to change culture and way of life. That the Roman Catholic Church didn't react very well to those ideas. They implemented or instituted the Spanish Inquisition in Spain, for example, to kick anyone who was non-Catholic out of Spain. The Protestant Reformation was met with disdain and scorn by the Catholic Church. In fact, Luther was actually excommunicated and had to start his own branch of Christianity. Luther was incredibly upset, remember, with the sale of indulgences and the power of the Pope. The scientific revolution kind of came from Renaissance ideas, this questioning of old ideas and using the power of observation and the scientific method to better understand the world around them. All right. So I'm going to take a break. I see questions. The Mongols, Supri, conquered all of Asia. Just about all of Asia. Not Japan and not parts of Southeastern Asia, but a lot of mainland Asia, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. And they encouraged trade all throughout that empire, which led to lots of cultural diffusion. And the Mongols adopted the ways of governing to rule their empire from China and the Muslim world especially. Michael, the Aztec, Mayan, Incan stuff is all on the note page. Primarily, you should know how they were governed and then how they were able to adapt to their geography to create advanced civilizations. The other branches you need to know. The branches that you need to know are in Christianity, that there was first a split between the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox Christians, and then later the Roman Catholic branch of Christianity split into Roman Catholicism, Western Catholicism broke into Roman Catholicism, and the Protestant divisions. You don't need to know all of the individual Protestant groups, though. Just that they protested the teachings of the Catholic Church as they were being done in Western Europe. Predominantly, break from the rituals and the sale of indulgences and the power of the Pope were the things that most angered Protestants. You should know the scientific achievements that led to the Age of Exploration. Scientific and technological advancements in general, like gunpowder, another one, prime example of a technological achievement that changed history in a variety of ways. It made basically the invention of gunpowder made the conquest of the Americas probably more possible, because it gave the Europeans much more superior, they just had a better military and army and better and simpler fighting techniques because they had gunpowder and guns and cannons. As a result of the European conquest and exploration of the Americas that started in 1492, there was a massive devastation, or the population of Native Americans and American Indians, Amerindians in the Western Hemisphere were devastated, primarily because of, again, the military techniques of the Europeans. But the reason that the population declined so much so rapidly was because of the spread of things like smallpox and measles. And even after the initial conquest, once Spain and other colonial powers took territory in the Americas, Amerindians and later African slaves died because of the terrible and poor working treatment or working conditions in plantations. The Americas were transformed by European conquest and exploration, especially in Central and South America. I mean, the fact that Roman Catholicism and Spanish are key parts of Latin and Central American culture is all a result of Spanish conquest of the Americas. You also had a major change as a result of the Columbian Exchange in people, ideas, animals, plants being transferred from Europe and Asia to the Americas and Europe, Asia, and Africa to the Americas that had never been seen before on those continents, or at least hadn't been seen in hundreds of millions of years. Like, for example, potato, corn, tomatoes, all became important parts of the European diet, and they weren't part of the European diet before that. Again, we talked already about how West Africa was greatly influenced by Islam, and before their contact with these before contact with other parts of the world, specifically Europe and Asia, that the West African trading kingdoms and other territories and regions in Africa developed highly advanced civilizations. They flourished, the trade flourished because of gold and salt. We haven't talked about the Byzantine Empire at all, but you guys remember that the Byzantine Empire was at its height under Justinian, because he ordered the construction and rebuilding of Constantinople into an amazing city, because he ordered the conquest and reconquering of territories around the Mediterranean Sea, and then reorganized the rules and laws in Justinian's code. You need to know that the European explorers and conquerors were able to take over the Americas primarily because of their military technology, the fact that they had horses, and because they spread disease. And then when they conquered the Americas, they treated everyone there very poorly. You don't need to know specifically any of the other major explorers. Columbus and Da Gama are obviously important, and so is Henry Hudson and Henry Cabot and Vasco da Gama and Francisco Pizarro and Hernando Cortez. But For the purposes of this test, you don't need to know all those individuals. You should remember in China, we didn't talk about this before, but we talked about the Tang and the Song dynasty a little bit, that the civil service system to fill government jobs and civil service exam system was created because of Confucius's teachings. And in fact, the people who were tested to take or obtain government jobs had to know a lot of what Confucius taught in a lot of his readings or a lot of his writings. In Europe, as a result of the Age of Exploration, there was also a major change in the way that governments were organized. Absolute governments began to take, or absolute rulers began to take greater power in their nations, like Philip II of Spain, Louis XIV in France, James I in England, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great in Russia. The results of those absolute rulers taking power in Europe is mixed. Sometimes they did and made really great achievements, and then sometimes they made really bad decisions. And because the absolute rulers are the only individual person that has power in a country, like Philip II in Spain was the only person who could send or stop the Spanish Armada, sometimes those decisions worked out very well, sometimes they did not. In Russia, for example, policies of westernization by Catherine and Peter did modernize Russian culture some, but also set them backwards in terms of serfdom and in terms of serfdom and social structure in Russia. And in England, some kings and queens had great success, like Elizabeth and her sister before her, Mary, were strong monarchs that listened to the needs and will of the needs and wants of their people in Parliament. But then the people who followed them, the Stuarts, didn't listen as well, and ultimately, the fact that they didn't listen, the Stuarts led to the Glorious Revolution and William and Mary coming from the Netherlands to take over as the King and Queen of England and agreeing to the English Bill of Rights. Before William and Mary took over, there was the English Civil War, in which people inside of England rebelled against the Stuart rule and for greater power in Parliament. And people who supported Parliament were called, you guys should remember, the Roundheads, and were led by Oliver Cromwell. It's 10 o'clock and it's really late. Like, I should be in bed by now. So I'm going to turn this off. If you guys have other questions or concerns, you can send me an email and I will answer them early tomorrow morning, and I can address your concerns before the final. I'm going to ask that you guys bring your phones and something to write with, just in case I am not able to get the Chromebooks or some other device for you guys to enter in your answers for the final exam tomorrow. You should go to bed also, though. Don't stay up too late. Don't stay up all night for sure. It's very important that you get a good night's rest. Sorry for the glitches before. That should be everything. You guys have wonderful evenings, and I will see you all tomorrow. Okay, bye.